Welcome to the Togetherness Redefined podcast and videocast. I'm your host, Celeste Orr, and this is where we get together to talk about all sorts of ways to connect with our families. Today I'm interviewing Colleen Kessler. She's from Raising Lifelong Learners, and she has given us today so many resources for those of us who are raising gifted or anxious or quirky kiddos. I'm a huge fan of quirky, out of the box kinds of kids. I think because I was one myself, and I have a couple in my house. So if you do too, today's episode is jam-packed full of resources for you. So I won't beat around the bush. I'm just gonna, dive right into this interview because it is full of so much encouragement and resource for you. But before we hop in, I just want to let you know that you don't have to worry about taking notes during this episode. There's going to be so many things that you want to access. I've taken notes for you, gathered links, and put them over at togethernessredefined.com. When you click on podcast, you will see the cover here for Help in Your Pocket for Gifted, Anxious, and Quirky Kiddos with Colleen Kessler. So if you go over there, you can access all the links to everything we talk about. So let's dig in. Right. A big hello to Colleen Kessler from Raising Lifelong Learners. Thank you so much for being here, Colleen. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love all that you do. And so this is a pleasure for me to have a chance to talk to you.
Awesome. So I want to tell our podcast listeners that I ran into Colleen in the homeschool community online, and I have really just admired your work ever since. But very recently, I have been deeply impacted in my own parenting and homeschool by two of your resources. So one of them is the Anxiety Toolkit. I want to make sure you talk about that, and I've shared about it online. And then the other is your newsletter, where you recently talked about kids who can't or won't sleep, and especially gifted kids. So I've found a lot of peace from those two things, and I would love for us to start there, you sharing about those things.
Sure. Yeah. So like Celeste said, I have a resource that I actually published last year called the Anxiety Toolkit. And essentially it's a deck of cards that is attached to a ring. And it's filled with 96 different prompts to help you and your kiddo manage anxiety. I speak at homeschool conventions, and every single year that I speak, I do anywhere between 2 and 4 talks during the season. And I always make sure at least one of them is about anxiety, because gifted and twice exceptional kids often struggle with anxiety. And anxiety is kind of like unfortunately, an up and coming thing in our world right now. And more kids and adults struggle with it. And so I just figured that it was really important for parents whose kids are a little bit more anxious than they think that they should be, know that they're not alone and have kind of a toolkit of resources, a toolbox of resources to draw from. So I always wanted to make sure at least one of my talks related to some aspect or facet of anxiety. And I've done things all through the years, like how anxiety impacts sleep, how it impacts your homeschool, ways that you can manage it with, learning and relationships, and then perfectionism and how that's related to anxiety and such. And almost every time, without fail, every time I do that talk, I have a line of parents waiting to talk to me afterwards because something in the talk resonates and something helps them or makes them realize that there was something that they've been missing and they want to try. But almost at every single convention, one or more parents would say things like, "Oh, I wish I could just bundle you up in my pocket because you could give me the ideas right in the moment when I need it." Or I wish you could write all those ideas down into like scripts so I could just pull them out and know exactly what to say to my kid in the middle of a meltdown in the grocery store, or if we're on the road somewhere and I don't know how to calm them down because something triggered them in the back seat, but I still have to drive. And that just kept coming back to me again and again. I had those kinds of ideas in my head, not because I am an expert on anxiety, but because I struggle with anxiety. I've been to therapy myself. My daughter, my oldest, actually, my 18-year-old has anxiety. He's not diagnosed as having an anxiety disorder, but he definitely displays anxiety kind of symptoms and worry to a great degree. He's profoundly gifted, and so he sees potential problems in just about everything and then overly worries about them. But my now 11-year-old was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder about 4 years ago. And she is, I mean, I've said before in talks, she's the bravest person I know because she's always afraid of something. There's always something that's looming. She has that kind of like doom hanging over her, like waiting for the other shoe to fall, kind of feeling that something could go wrong at any moment. But she still gets out of bed every morning. And she's afraid to go to bed at night because who knows what might happen to her loved ones in the middle of the night, but she still goes to bed every night. So she pushes through it. And so she's been to therapy. I've been to therapy. My oldest has been to therapy. And we've worked together, you know, through the therapy and through books that I've read and other resources to put it into language from, you know, as when they were super little all the way to now where, you know, Trevor's 18 and Logan's 11. And so I just started brainstorming actually with the help of those kids, what kinds of things in specific moments were helpful. And so we came up with, I really wanted it to be something that was portable, something that was super accessible and usable. And I figured another book with those tips in it would just be something that was too big and too cumbersome and not something that was super practical and usable. And so I spent about a year trying to figure out how to make that happen. And I found a company that makes custom playing cards. I wanted it to be very durable, and playing cards, I mean, you can spill water on them and twist them and turn them. It's hard to rip them. And so these cards are short prompts, activities for different situations when you're at home, when you're out and about, when you're settling down to bed, and then mindfulness techniques that you can really use at any of those times. And they're made out of the same material as bicycle playing cards. And again, for practicality purposes, we had holes drilled in them and binder rings put on them, so you wouldn't worry about like dropping them and losing them. And so that's what they are. They're a deck of cards with practical ideas to use in the moment when your kid is struggling. I mean, and really even when you're struggling, because those kind of bridge the age gap. And then to always have something, because what works today with anxiety isn't necessarily going to work tomorrow. And so you always need, and that's why I call it a toolkit and why I talk with parents about having tools at your disposal, because there's different tools that are right for different situations. And you need to have kind of an arsenal to be able to draw from, because you never know what's going to cause the trigger when you're dealing with anxiety. So that's that. And it's physical. You can purchase it on my website. And it comes, it's been a really good therapeutic tool because my 11-year-old packages them all up for every single person who orders. And she thinks about the kids that could be helping like her. And she puts little fidgets and little confetti kind of stuff inside of the packages with it, and stickers in the bag. And she gets so excited about sending that off. So
Yeah. And I will share a link on our show notes for listeners so that they can access that. And it really, you know, honestly, I bought the kit for myself because, you know, we come from an area in the South, you know, where we really don't talk about anxiety that much. And I homeschooled my kids since they were really little, you know, so there's been no assessments or none of that stuff. You know, it's been just me observing when someone would get anxious or when something would come up for myself, and noticing, you know, I don't always have the wherewithal to think, okay, what do I do in this instance? So it has been so helpful. And I've had friends, you know, since I've been sharing it, reach out and say, I'm so glad you posted about this. I bought it and it really helps me. So it's really, really helping a lot of people. So Colleen, I do want you to, you know, jump off of that and tell us about raising lifelong learners and what you do online and sort of what you help parents with.
Sure. So gosh, my story like is windy, and I think like so many people's. I was a teacher for almost 2 decades, a decade and a half really. I started with just teaching elementary school, and really early on, I think my second year, I ended up going back for my master's, and I got a master's degree in gifted education, and started teaching. And you can learn about, I have a podcast, there's a couple episodes that talk about like how my path kind of wound to where it was. But I ended up pretty quickly in my career becoming a gifted specialist. And so I worked with gifted and twice exceptional kids on a daily basis. And I worked with their teachers as well and their parents to help them accommodate their needs and get their needs met, because gifted kids fall through the cracks often, which is one of those myths that needs busting. They're not the top of the class, and they're not the ones that get all the A's. They're the ones that struggle, and their achievement is often masked by other kind of comorbid issues like anxiety and ADHD, and in some cases, learning disabilities and dyslexia and things like that. And the more and more I worked with these kids, the more and more fascinated I became by the way their brains worked. Fast forward, I ended up leaving teaching, not to homeschool, but to freelance from home. I really enjoyed the process of writing and creating resources for parents and teachers and kids, and realized pretty early on that my oldest probably fell within the gifted range. And he was fascinating to me. And I realized that as much as I loved teaching and loved working with other people's children, I was really missing a lot of my own kids' upbringing. And when I got pregnant with my second child, there's 5.5 years difference between my first two because we had some health issues in between there. I kind of made a commitment to myself, if I could make it work, working from home and writing full time, then I would do that, so I could be the one that got my kids off the bus in the afternoon and be the one to hear all of their firsts and nurture them. You know, the world doesn't always work out the way you expect it to. God works in mysterious ways, and you never know what you're going to get hit with. It turned out that school was not a good fit for my oldest. He is profoundly gifted. He struggles with anxiety and ADHD, with marked impulsivity, and basically he was just in trouble all the time. And so after a lot of starts and stops, and examining other opportunities for learning in school situations, we realized that the best course of action was to pull him out. And we pulled him out in the middle of first grade to homeschool him. And within that first year, I realized that it was going to be really difficult to meet his needs. At that time, I had a toddler and a newborn baby, and keep up the rigorous freelance schedule I'd been keeping. But I love writing and I love creating resources. So I knew that I would kind of go crazy if I didn't have an outlet. So I started writing about what we were doing. I started a website, Raising Lifelong Learners. And at first, it was just kind of a mishmash of everything that new bloggers write. Like I cleaned my house today, Wordless Wednesday, with just a picture on there, and all sorts of random things. But the posts that resonated with readers were the posts about raising and homeschooling gifted and twice exceptional kids, and all of the quirks that went along with that. Probably because I was coming at it from the perspective of both having the background and knowing how the brain of those kids worked, but also seeing the practicality and how difficult it is to work and live and love on those kids 24/7, because they're really, really challenging. And I've often said, like, I wish that I could go back to some of the parents whose kids I taught and apologize to them, because it is a different situation living with them 24/7 than teaching them and advocating for them the 6 to 8 hours I had them, during the school week. And so I started writing more and more about that. I started speaking about that. And then I started developing resources that parents can use at home. The podcast was born out of that, so I could reach more people who needed to know that they weren't alone in raising quirky, interesting, differently wired kids. And then most recently, we launched a learning community for gifted, twice exceptional, and otherwise creative kids. And these aren't kids who are identified, though some of the ones who have joined the community are. It's not like you have to show a test score to get in. You just have to know your kid's a little quirky and needs some more creativity activities, some outside the box thinking, nurturing, some chances to connect with other kids who are like them and think differently, along with a nurturing of those social and emotional skills that they struggle with: anxiety, friendships, motivation. getting things done, perseverance, all of those kinds of things. Asynchrony. Gifted kids, twice exceptional kids are very asynchronous. They learn kind of in a choppy way instead of that linear path that most kids follow. And so what we're about, at Raising Lifelong Learners is really just meeting parents where they are and kids where they are and helping them know that they're not alone. Kids aren't alone. There's other kids like them out there, and parents aren't alone, and they're not messing things up. So in a nutshell, that's what we do.
That's cool. Yes. So I know, for myself, and I would imagine a lot of parents out there, I started homeschooling, on a trial basis. And, a lot of people put their kids in traditional school on a trial basis. They're like, I have a child that is very wild, or has some big ideas even at the age of 4, and I'm going to try this. Well, that didn't work, I'm going to try something else. So in my particular situation, my kids have never been tested for anything or anything like that, what you were talking about. But I could tell at the age of 3, 4, he wasn't going to fit well in a classroom. And then as things have progressed, now he's 15, my oldest is 15 and my youngest is about to be 13. I can really start to see why, and I can start to see some of those things coming out that we've been able to, as his mom, I've been able to identify. So I can only imagine, that's pretty difficult in a classroom setting. But when people's kids, when people have kids who are struggling, it's hard to know, do they have a disability or are they gifted, and to have a resource like yours is just tremendous for those parents. So I want to switch gears a little bit here. And I do want to say, I want to give those links to people, because when you are a parent who's struggling or your kid is struggling, having a resource is life-changing. And I'm sure you've seen that with so many people. So that's one of the reasons why I want to bring you on the podcast. And the other reason is I would like for you to share your path and your journey of starting with a blog and, finding the time and the courage to write and to share your heart with people. And then, like you talked about, switching gears to be able to provide a resource. So I believe that all moms in particular have a story to tell, whether they're a writer or not, or whether they really have always wanted to write, but they don't think they're good enough. So I have a lot of moms who are creatives, but they're at that, that point where they're like, okay, but how do I start? So what would you say to them about finding that courage and that discipline to find the time to put into their craft?
Yeah, there really isn't anything profound except that you just have to do it. If you feel this pull to share a story, whether that's through, painting or, weaving or writing or speaking or anything, you just have to do it. And there's nothing bad that can come out of making time for yourself to tell your story or to share your passion or your interests, even if it's just with yourself. The time you take to work on that craft is just as valuable as the time that you take to meal plan or clean your house or school your children or whatever it is, because it feeds your soul. And the quickest way to burn out when you're a homeschooling mom or a stay-at-home mom in any way, shape, or form is to forget about yourself and who you are. And for me, I couldn't not write. I couldn't not read. Those are just two things that have always, from the time I was really young, writing bad poetry in spiral notebooks, to where I am now, those were things that made me tick. And I remember a friend, oh gosh, when my husband and I were either newly married or engaged, asked me, if you had to choose, your husband or if you had to choose between having your husband and having that relationship, or never reading again, never having a book in your hand again? What would you choose? And I looked at my husband, I said, this is really a hard choice. I don't know that I could live and not pick up a book. I love you more than anything, but I would only be half of a person if I put everything into loving you. There's got to be, in order to be a whole person, you have to honor all of what you've been given. And that's really an unfair question. And of course he rolled his eyes. He actually assumed I would choose the books because he knows me well. But I think that there's something important in there to know, as moms, that we need to have something that makes us who we are. And I had an opportunity. I was on a panel discussion at a convention that I was speaking at, and it came up, because the three of us that were on the panel were all moms who wrote and did other things and homeschooled our children. And oftentimes when you're faced with people who, on the outside seem more successful than you are, which, just remember, you only ever see part of what a person is, right? So what you're seeing of me or Celeste or anybody else, through the podcast and through websites and through Instagram or Facebook or any kind of social media, it's only a part of what a person is. But we get the question all the time whenever we do these panels, like, how do you balance? How do you manage? And there is no magic. It's just, you do it. You make the time for the things that are important to you. And I remember the question then, spun out into other questions. And one of the moms said, but I don't want my kids to feel like I'm neglecting them. And I talked to her afterwards at the time, and I brought it up in another panel later because I thought it was so important. You have to remember, your kids are watching you do everything. And so they're watching you be so self-sacrificial, you're losing yourself. And we are raising the next generation of mothers and fathers. And we don't want our kids to think that motherhood is the absence of self. We want them to know that when they're mothers, they're supposed to nurture their kids by nurturing themselves and leading by example. We don't want our kids to look at what we're doing and say, I could never homeschool my kids, or I could never stay at home and not work because I never want to lose who I am. We want our kids to know that homeschooling is a part of them, and making the meals and keeping the house and loving their father is a part of them, but so is nurturing their own talents. A good friend of mine, homeschool mom, 3 kids, she just signed up for online tap lessons, bought herself a brand new pair of tap shoes, and is budgeting to put a little section of tap floor in her basement because she used to love tap dancing and she misses it, and she wanted to do something for herself. Well, her daughter's already talking about doing those lessons with her. You can build new connections and deeper relationships with your family by honoring and nurturing your gifts. And so if you want to write badly, but write. If you want to curl up with a good book and learn something new to yourself, do it. And let your kids see you doing it and making time. And tell your kids, hey, we can do what we were going to do later. I'm going to spend this next half an hour reading because I just need a break and I want to give myself something so that I have the energy to do more later. And I don't think that you could do anything better for your kids by doing good for yourself.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I have to say, in this particular podcast season that we're recording, I've been interviewing other authors who are moms, and they've said the very same thing. Like, it's nothing that is magic. And I can attest to that. Like, it's not this thing that you finally wake up and have time for, or that you discover a magic wand or a silver bullet for. Like, you literally have to make the decision and say, this is important to me. But I do find it's that motivation and the whole letting go of mom guilt thing that holds a lot of us back. And, I just have to say, I put grad school on the back burner for 14 years before I finally went back and realized, okay, I'm never gonna just have the time. I've got to make
Right.
the time. And it really activated me to, first of all, realize that what I went to grad school was not what I wanted to be. That my grad school was a pivotal moment in my life to realize, my kids can see that I'm going to school online for college, that I'm
Mhm.
studying super hard and I'm making great grades and I'm failing and getting back up again. Like, I feel
Mhm.
like that was a really good example for them. But at the same time, they also saw that it was hard, and that I discovered that I'm going to finish this degree, but this isn't the path that I thought I would take. But
Mhm.
it also activated the writer in me that had been in the closet, since I was 8, and actually helped me realize, oh, I do have time to read all those books that have been on my list. I have time to write when I make time for it. So I love to interview other writers and get their story, because I'm really finding, for all of those mamas who are in the closet wanting to write, wishing they could write,
Mhm.
that step, that first day you get up and take 15 minutes, that's
Yes.
that's critical. So, and you have books. I want to talk about the books that you have written and your new book that's coming out right now. If you could share
Mhm.
maybe all the books that you've written, and a little bit about what they are about, and of course I'll link to them.
Yeah. So I've actually been writing for a really long time. So I have a lot of books. So I won't go into all of them. When I first left teaching to freelance write, I wrote books for parents, teachers, and kids, and probably have 25 or 30 titles that you can find on all sorts of
Wow.
public library shelves and school library shelves. Those books, like you go into the library at a school or the public library, and there's a series for kids like the planets, and there's 9 books, one about each planet, or 8 now, but Pluto's still out there. um, and all sorts of different ones like that. I wrote dozens and dozens of those when I first started writing,
Cool.
and so you could go in. It's funny to me because I don't have a lot of those anymore, because they were just like slim volumes, for school and public libraries. But every once in a while, someone will tag me on Instagram or Facebook and be like, "This is about octopuses, and it says Colleen Kessler. Was this you?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that was me." So I have
I
lots of
didn't even
fun
know
books.
that. I had no
Yeah,
idea.
I
So
it's very fun. I have a whole series of books called A Project Guide to, and it's like, I don't know, light and physics, or light and optics, and the solar system, and simple
cool.
machines, all sorts of fun stuff, forces in motion. Um, and my poor kids, when they were really young and we started homeschooling, like they just pretty much learned science, and that was it, because at the time I was writing a lot of science content. My most recent books, though, are more mainstream. I had a book come out 2 years ago called 100 oh wait oh my gosh, I mess up the title all the time. Yeah, 100 backyard activities that are the dirtiest, coolest, creepy crawliest ever.
I love
And
that.
that's super fun. And what I loved about that book is it ended up becoming a family project, because the publishers hired a photographer to come out to us and allowed us to stage all of the activities in the book. And we got to bring in some of my kids' friends.
Cool.
And so the book is filled with pictures of my kids and their friends doing the activities, and like looking for birds out in nature and playing with bugs. And so it was a lot of fun, and they kind of feel like it's their book too. And that book was recently just translated into Turkish, interestingly enough.
Cool.
So yeah, so I have a Turkish book too. And then I have my newest book came out at the end of December, which is a terrible time for a publisher to publish a book. Let me just tell you that. And then in the middle of a pandemic and the holiday season, it was just not really a great time to promote a new book. But it is by far my favorite book project to date. The book is called Raising Resilient Sons: A Boy Mom's Guide to Building a Strong, Confident, and Emotionally Intelligent Family. And it has so much of my heart in it. It's about building confident kids, specifically boys, and helping them know that emotions aren't a bad thing. They're not a four-letter word. But helping them not only embrace the emotions that they feel and empathize with others, but also hold on to their masculinity in the process. They are allowed to be boys and men and leaders while still being kind and nurturing and compassionate. And when we connect with our boys in that kind of way, we really are able to spread it to our entire family and build this connected and empathetic family that is kind of all on the same team. And it's just peppered with anecdotes from my own life. I have an 18-year-old son and an 8-year-old son. So we run the gamut. And I've gotten stories that I've included in the book from parents of grown boys all the way down to little itsy bitsy boys. And it's filled with those anecdotes and then practical ideas that you can implement right away to build the connections and that emotional intelligence and nurturing in your kids right away. So that is so far been my absolute favorite project ever.
I love that. And I love the book. I've been reading it for the past week or two
Good.
since we started talking. And it's so encouraging, even for, I think about parents who aren't homeschooling because they can't or they don't want to, but they have a deep desire to have a deep relationship and a long lasting connection with their children. This in particular, I find, having boys myself, it is a different kind of relationship. Obviously, when I was growing up and my relationship with my parents, I found it so easy to just, talk about whatever I wanted to, as a girl. And I also, part of the reason that we ever started looking into alternative school options is that as a girl, I realized that the classroom was set up for me. I felt so comfortable there. It was exactly what I needed. But my friends who were boys, they didn't feel the same way. It was easy for me to excel all of my whatever, giftedness or not. I have no idea. It was fine. And when I finished my assignments, I just read, for the rest of the school. But when they did things, sometimes they were, punished for their overactivity or things like that, so studying sociology and child development in college, I realized, the way that a classroom is set up. So your book really encourages parents, whether they homeschool or not, to in different ways and different tactics to build those connections with their sons. And I just love it. I can't wait to share it with people.
Oh, thank you. I was hoping, I really wanted it to be one of those, moms are busy, and I wanted it to feel like you were sitting down for coffee with a friend. I wanted it to be very conversational, super easy, and not overly heavy, but still practical and applicable enough that it was worth reading.
Yeah.
And so it's always nice to hear that people are enjoying it. I appreciate that.
Yes. And I love easy books. I just have to say that, a couple of the reviews that I got on my first book that I published this past summer is, it's an easy read, or it's simple ideas, but impactful, or something like that. And at first I started to get a little offended, because I was like, wait, are they saying like it's too simple, but I quickly realized like, things like this are supposed to be simple, relationships are not rocket science. It's just
Right.
encouragement that we can share with moms as moms, So I love that about your book. And I wonder if you'll tell us, where can people buy it? Where can they find it if they're interested?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's published traditionally, so it is wherever books are sold. You can get it, on Amazon. I know a lot of people, I've gotten some emails recently that people aren't wanting to buy on Amazon right now, and that's totally fine. I actually just put, I've got a couple conventions coming up that hopefully are going to be meeting in person this year. So I just put in a really large order for copies to be able to bring with me. So at some point here in the next couple weeks, we're going to have an option where people can buy it on the site. And then I can send it to you signed. But in the meantime, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can order it from any of the small independent bookstores if you want to support a local bookseller. They can get it from their distributors because the publisher is Ulysses Press, but Ulysses Press is a small imprint of Simon & Schuster. And so Simon & Schuster distributes it. So any bookstore that can get Simon & Schuster books can get this book. And I'd love it, actually, if you would figure out a way to support a small independent bookseller, someone who's trying to stay in business in this crazy time that we have. Supporting small businesses is so important right now.
Yes, absolutely. So on the show notes, I'll make sure that I link to an independent bookstore that actually, already has it set up to do
Okay.
that. So that'll be cool.
Yeah.
And Colleen, I wanted to make this podcast sweet and short and really like action packed so that people can listen to it more than once, which I think we've already done. But, at Togetherness Redefined, we're always talking about different ways to think about family togetherness and ways to build deep relationships with our kids. Sometimes that's through travel and adventure and, getting outdoors and getting messy. But other times it is through some intentional action, and as you and I talked about today, sometimes it really is through moms finding what their passion is and going after that so that they can come alive for their families, which I'm a huge proponent of. So I wonder today, as we close out, is there something that you would like to speak to moms, maybe a word of encouragement, no matter what their family dynamic is like? I know this pandemic has been difficult. I'll just say that, and I try not to make everything about the pandemic because the last thing we need is another reminder that it's going on. But I just find like as it, I thought it was just going to be a couple of weeks, to tell you the truth. And then it was like, okay, it'll just be a couple months. But as we're recording this, we're coming up on the 1 year mark. And, my kids they're missing interaction with other kids. I'm missing it. And I'm starting to find ways, to do that again. But I wonder if there's a mom who does need encouragement today. What would you say to her? How would you encourage and inspire her?
Yeah, I would just say you do what you can in the moment that you have, and so I'll give you a practical example of that in a second. But then on the flip side of that is you don't beat yourself up for what you can't do. Everybody is struggling, and everybody has struggles, and so it's really easy for us to feel in any moment that we're the only ones, and you're not. So no matter what it is you're feeling right now, whether it's, super positive feelings or super negative ones, you're not alone. There's other people out there feeling exactly what you're feeling. My friend and I were just discussing today, actually, that it feels like seasonal affective disorder is heavier this year than it's ever been. And that so many people we know personally or connect with online are talking about how difficult and long this winter has seemed for those of us who live in wintry conditions, and how much more it feels than previous years. And so even with that, you're not alone. So if you're feeling down, you're hitting bunches of stuff, right? You're hitting seasonal stuff, you're hitting the pandemic weariness, the loss of what was, the uncertainty of what will be. We just don't know. And so when you're feeling that way, know that it's valid, it's right, it's real, and it's okay. And to discount it can only be detrimental to both you and your kids. It's important to talk to your kids about what they're feeling as well as what you're feeling. Now, you certainly don't want to tell them you're like despairing. You want to keep it age appropriate and uplifting to some degree, but you do want them to know that it's normal to struggle and that you struggle too. And then be aware and notice what your kids are struggling with and what they need. So for example, we were in the beginning, staying away from a lot of people too. And then we ended up reconnecting with one family from our co-op months ago. I mean, it's been months now. And just intentionally with that family, because that family had kids that were close with all of my kids and kind of matched up. My oldest is always an outlier because he's 5.5 years older than everybody else. But the younger three had ones to match up to. And so we intentionally got together with them, rotating houses throughout the whole thing. And just recently, as things have started opening back up to some degree, we've scheduled like some small independent, like private lessons and activities. We went glass blowing on Tuesday with this family. Cool. And it was in this small little glass house. And we booked a private lesson. I over tipped them because it was just our families. And I know that they're struggling as well, as small business. But doing things to be intentional. So the reason we chose that is because we felt all of our kids needed to do something that seemed like they used to do, homeschool field trips. But then even the getting together, it exhausts me to get together with people on a weekly basis like that. I'm definitely an introvert. It drains me. I'm tired for a day and a half after. I spend an entire day with another family, but I do it because 2 of my 4 kids are extreme extroverts and they need that time with their friends to do something. And then my other 2 who are kind of more like me, but more like ambivert-ish, like they could take or leave being around people. I try to take one for a drive, one-on-one time at least once a week. I've got to run to the grocery store. Okay. Grab your mask. Let's go. You're coming with me. Or I'm just going to go drive through the bank. So she's at least, getting in the car and getting out. So recognize who your kids are, what they need, and see if there are ways you can just connect one-on-one, if that's all that's possible right now, even if it's a drive around the block, blasting music everybody else in the family hates. One of my kids loves Broadway. So go for a drive and blast a Broadway soundtrack and get fries from a drive-through and, don't tell anybody that you and mom got fries alone. But just do something intentional every week with each of your kids at least one time. And then likewise, do something intentional for you. There's at least one day a week where I don't turn on my computer after dinner. I usually work at night. I don't turn on my computer. I sit by the fire or I sit by my space heater in my office and I read a book. And they're not like weighty volumes. They're like old Nora Roberts books that I used to read when I was nursing my oldest, and I'm rereading them like old friends, things they don't have to think about. So be okay nurturing yourself and your kids, even if it looks different than it used to look.
Yeah, that's so important, Colleen. And it's so easy to forget. I just want to say that, those 2 things in particular, the one-on-ones in my own family has been something that we've gotten away from. And I've really missed it, because we had these standard go-to places, even though we used to travel and now we don't travel. Right now we're not traveling as much. But we would always go to a coffee shop, or an ice cream shop. Well, we can't do that right now, especially where we're living in Maine. Things like that aren't open for you to just go and sit. So, I haven't found a replacement, and I really need to get intentional about doing that. And also, I think it hit like 10 or 12 nights in a row that I was working in the margins, trying to get a few projects out the door. And then I would always, after dinner, use that time. And I got to exhaustion because I'm like, I have no break in there, so I love that being proactive. And I wonder, before we close out, if there is a mom out there who has a child that's really struggling right now, and they think it may be anxiety, or it may be just the pandemic, or maybe it's something with learning, what would be your word of encouragement and, even resource for them?
Yeah. The biggest encouragement I can give you is that you know your child. So trust yourself and trust your gut. If you feel that your kiddo is struggling with something, they probably are. And so I'll say 2 things to that. One, talk to your kiddo. And if your child struggles with talking about what their feelings are, then just pop some popcorn, put a movie on, and snuggle. Go for a drive. I find drives tend to get kids talking more than anything else, because especially if you make sure you don't let them bring any devices or anything else, because they're captive. They're not looking at you, especially if they're in the front seat by you. They're like side by side, so you don't have to like face each other. And so you can get conversations out. And then if it gets to a point where you feel like you need more help and resources, number one, there's great books out there. And I can send you a list of a couple really good books that I recommend. One is Make Your Worrier a Warrior by Dan Peters. It's a great book. The Anxiety Toolkit's great, but there are a couple other books, Anxiety Free Kids. And know that if you need more help than a book or even my toolkit, there's nothing wrong with 1 or 2 sessions with a therapist or a child psychologist. And so many places are doing telehealth right now that you can just at least get some tools. A lot of therapy for kids is more about teaching the parents how to talk to their kids and help them through situations than not. And so you'll be right there with your child. It's not like you're throwing your child to a brand new person. The majority of the time, you're going to be sitting there talking with the therapist and your child anyway. And so I think that anytime you feel overwhelmed, especially when dealing with mental health issues, and anxiety is mental. So get help if you need it. You can always, if you're concerned or you have questions or you want to know if therapy is where you need to go or if there's a book that you can start with, you can always reach out to me. There is a contact page on my site that is just raisinglifelonglearners.com/contact. And the form on there goes directly to my email. There's also a voicemail widget if you're more comfortable talking. You can talk for up to 5 minutes and just ask me your question. And oftentimes I'll just hit record and record a message back to you, or I'll send you a list of resources to get you started. I don't want any parent to ever feel that they're in over their head with their own or their child's anxiety, because there are resources to help.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great, Colleen. And I feel the same way. And I think as we grow and get older, I think what I'm discovering personally is that anxiety is not something you've either always had or you will always have,
Right.
I know myself and a couple of other people who have lost parents recently. And, my mom was young. She was 57, so losing someone, it can trigger a lot of things, so if you find yourself feeling ways that you've never felt before, that can be a really good indication that it's time to, just reach out for a resource, which I'm loving right now. So before we close out, I want to thank you so much for being here. I can just, every time I record a podcast, especially with a resource attached to it, I can hear and see the mom, listening to this, watching this, going to the show notes and getting these links and finding even one thing. I always say if there's even one mom who was struggling and she finds something that can help her connect with her kid, that's exactly, why we do this. It's totally worth this time that it takes to produce this. So I'm so excited about that. And before we close, I want you to tell people how to find you and maybe the best way to connect with you and stay connected with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you first so much for having me. This was a really great conversation. And like I said, there's a contact form on my site if you want to reach out, personally. But my site has everything on it, raisinglifelonglearners.com. It has links to the new community, the Learners Lab that we started for kids. It has links to the podcast, any of the articles that I've written in the past, and all my social media. I'm pretty active on Instagram because it's easy, it's fun, and I enjoy it. But I also have a pretty vibrant Facebook community as well. And then that Learners Lab community, we're developing an off social media community for parents along with the kids. So start with the site and then kind of branch out from there. But I'd love to connect if you need any kind of resources or help.
That is awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Colleen.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening and watching today. Wherever you are and whatever you're going through, I hope this interview really gave you some hope and some encouragement for whatever's going on at your house right now. And don't forget, you can hop into all the links over at togethernessredefined.com. When you click podcast, you'll see a cover there that talks about help in your pocket for gifted, anxious, and quirky kiddos with Colleen Kessler. So I'll be there. I love to see you guys popping in and gathering those links and resources for yourselves. And I really love interacting with you in the email group. So if you have a question or a comment that this interview really didn't satisfy for you, or if you want to know more about homeschool or building deep relationships with your kids, gathering resources to help you really connect, I would love to talk to you. Just hop over to togethernessredefined.com/subscribe and hop into the email group, send me a message, and I'll be there. And I'll be right back here next time.